Dear LLSP alumni, welcome to this fourth program of our 2020 Lunch and Learn series. Our guest today, Mr. Abed Awad, is a longtime KARAMAH board member and our VP for 2020. Mr. Awad is a founding partner of Awad and Khoury LLP, located in Hasbrook Heights, New Jersey, who focuses on complex matrimonial law, estate planning, including faith-based estate planning, Islamic law, and business law. With native fluency in Arabic and recognition as an international expert in Islamic law and the laws of Muslim countries, Mr. Awad is also an adjunct law professor at Rutgers Law School, Newark, and has taught courses in Islamic banking and finance, as well as Islamic jurisprudence. Mr. Awad was also a contributor to Sharia Source, Harvard Law School's Islamic Legal Studies Initiative. Mr. Awad has been the recipient of too many awards to list. He's also served as a commentator for national and international outlets such as the New York Times, CNN, BBC, NPR, the Boston Globe, Chicago Tribune, and so on. Whew. So, Abed, tell me a bit about your family. How and when did your father come to the US, and why did you choose to study law instead of medicine or engineering, the holy trinity, if I may say so, of career paths for first-generation immigrants to the United States?
Well, first, assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much, Sarah, for that very kind introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this program. My background is very interesting in the sense that my father immigrated to the United States in 1958. I think he was probably 17 years old. And he came to join his uncle, who had immigrated to the United States in 1917. Mm-hmm. So we have pretty deep roots in the US, and I was born in Englewood, New Jersey. But I was very fortunate that my dad, after he got out of the service in 1969, which is the year I was born, he worked in the US, built a large wholesale business in the West Coast, wholesaling to the traditional Arab Palestinian vocation, which was traveling sales. They would sell products mainly to immigrant farm workers around the country. So they would travel from the East Coast to the West Coast, just visiting farm locations and selling their products. But in 1976, when I was 6.5 years old, my dad said he had enough. He wanted us to go back to the village. He wanted us to get the benefit of a rearing in a very traditional, old-fashioned Palestinian village where he was raised. So we returned to a village.
Will you say us? How many us are we talking about here?
I am one of 9 children.
Oh my God.
So I'm the oldest of the 9, 6 boys and 3 girls. My father was very busy.
Well, and your mother was a saint, clearly.
Yes, she is. Actually, she really is a saint. She is a saint, and most of my moral rearing and inspiration to work hard for gender equity, for charity, and to fight for people is inspired by my mom and her religious. My mom was very religious. She would read the Quran all the time, pray, fasted Mondays and Thursdays, and her Islam was not political Islam. Her Islam was this what we would call in Arabic fitra. It was innate. It was just a way of life, and that impacted my my moral upbringing and my religious instruction and understanding. So I returned back to Palestine and started 2nd grade. So my dad had money. Like I said, he was a big wholesaler. So I was one of the haves in this small little village. And he enrolled me in the Friends Boys School, a Quaker school in Ramallah, because I was an American kid and he wanted me to get the best education. So I studied with the Quakers from 2nd grade to 11th grade in Palestine. And yes, there are Palestinian Quakers, and Palestinians are both Muslim and Christian. And Palestine is the cradle of Christianity, so Arabs
yes.
are
And
Christian.
the Quaker school has been in existence there in Ramallah for,
Since
I want to say, over
1830 or
150
1840.
years,
Yes,
something like that.
at
Yes,
least,
yes.
at least. So I graduated, I left in '86 from Palestine, and then I returned to New Jersey to my original roots. And I finished my senior year in high school and then enrolled in college, a local small Jesuit school called St. Peter's College in Jersey City. That was a great education, a great opportunity, because the Jesuits were very sympathetic. When they knew I was from Palestine, it was a very important issue for them. They supported me, they encouraged me. My political science professor who guided me in 1987 is still my friend today. He became the president of St. Peter's College. So this is how important it was for me to go to this really interesting small school. And I met my wife, Dorothy, at St. Peter's College when I was a junior, and we've been together ever since. Now, after I finished St. Peter's College, I've always wanted to be a lawyer. I think my dad wanted to be a lawyer, so he wanted me to be a lawyer.
Oh, okay.
He understood the political, social, economic impact lawyers have, and that they're very influential in the United States and in our legal system. So he encouraged me and pushed me to be a lawyer. After I graduated, I said, Dad, I'll definitely be a lawyer, but I want to improve my Arabic. I want to improve my Islamic studies and my readings. So I'm going to take a little bit of time off before I go to law school. So I decided
I think it was very understanding of him to allow you to do that, because I'm sure he was worried that you might not go back to school and get that higher degree, but you know, he had faith in you. So can you tell me a bit about what was happening in Palestine right about that time? Because when we talked about it, when you said you'd come back in '86, I was like, wasn't that the time of the first Intifada?
It was
Tell
the first
us a little bit
Intifada,
about what was happening at that time.
Well, what's happening is that I, of course, went to the Quaker school in Ramallah, which was in the city. So the cities are the hotbed of political activism and resistance. And that was the environment I grew up in. I grew up under occupation. I grew up under, I felt, lived, breathed an apartheid system. Like all youth, including our Quaker American teachers who were white from the Midwest who came, they lived the apartheid system, and we all participated in civil disobedience and to resist this occupation and call for liberty and freedom for the indigenous population, the Palestinians. So my dad in '86, when I came to the US to visit my relatives in northern New Jersey for summer vacation, my dad decided he's not going to let me go back. He said, you're just going to go to high school here. At that time, all youth, including myself, were pretty much aware of the occupation of this apartheid system and wanted to engage in civil disobedience. So I think he was pretty concerned of my political activism. And decided, you know, you're going back to New Jersey. So I
not unreasonable, considering how many young people were being accidentally shot and tear gassed and thrown in prison.
And it wasn't accidental.
That much has changed. Yes, yeah, well,
it was.
I remember the old joke about how the Palestinians clearly had an air force, because whenever the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, would shoot in the air to disperse the crowds, lo and behold, there'd be young Palestinians lying on the ground.
Yes, it was a very difficult time, and a lot of oppression, torture, imprisonment, confiscation of land, which continues till today. So I returned and started high school in West New York, New Jersey. I went to a high school called Memorial High School. From a small Quaker school, my class of 26 students that I knew from second grade, I went to a massive inner city high school that had like 2,000 students. So it was not an easy transition. It was not an easy transition, you know. So after I started to, I went to Columbia. I enrolled and I took some classes in Columbia to test the waters, to see if this was something that I really wanted to further explore and examine, meaning Arabic and Islam. And Columbia just like opened my eyes to the genius, the richness of the Muslim tradition. I remember the 15th floor in Butler Library, which was thousands, hundreds of thousands of books that were in Arabic. I've never seen so many books in Arabic ever. I wasn't raised, I wasn't taught this, I wasn't educated about this massive corpus of literature and law and so forth. So that inspired.
And were you a non-matriculated student? What kind of a program? You were okay. So really, it was almost self-guided learning at that point for you.
Yes.
You just dived right in.
I dived right in. I took 4 courses. I studied Islamic legal text. I studied Arabic composition, Arabic literature, Islamist movements. I took a lot of these courses. And then I decided I have to matriculate. I got to do something. This is an area I'm interested in. It inspired me. So I end up enrolling at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. So I moved to England. And by the way, at that time, I had already been married. I got married in 1993 with...
So you were the typical graduate student with wife and child or children in tow.
Exactly. So I got up, I left New Jersey, moved to London, studied Islamic law I did 2 years. I did a graduate certificate in comparative law with a focus on Islamic law. And then the second year, I did a master's in Islamic studies with a focus on the hadith, but focusing on hadith criticism and how authentication of hadith varied from one school of thought to another. And I wrote my MA thesis about the Mu'tazila, who are considered the free thinkers of Islam. They were a pretty interesting theological movement.
Near and dear to my heart. And then we know what happened to them, unfortunately, historically.
Yes, unfortunately. They were oppressed by the 10th century, 11th century, they became pretty much sidelined. But there's been a resurgence of interest in their theology and in their work, which is fascinating, and I do follow it. And I wanted to proceed and finish my PhD, and at that point, that's when my dad said, "Listen, brother, son, you're going to be financially dependent on me for the rest of your life."
What kind of an example are you to your brothers and sisters?
You can't be a student forever, you got to go to law school. I said, "All right, Dad, you're right." So what I did is I enrolled in Pace Law School in White Plains, New York, and attended law school. All the courses I took were comparative law, international law. I was
nothing really practical, clearly.
No, nothing practical. Then I was managing editor for solicitations at Pace International Law Review. In law school, I published a bunch of law reviews. Every paper I wrote for law school got published. And after I finished law school, I wanted to apply for jobs, and I wanted to do a clerkship because everybody said a clerkship would be a really a good grounding for a young lawyer. So I sent out my resume to, I don't know, like 200 clerkship judges in New Jersey. I only got 2 responses. So I got an interview with this judge. His name was George E. Sabbath. So he interviewed me the first time, and he said, "But son, I'm in the family part, and this is chancery. So this is divorce, custody, juvenile, family stuff. You didn't even take family law in law school. Are you sure you want to clerk for me?" Now, I love family law, Judge. I want to be a family lawyer. I just want a job. So he gave me a job, and that opened my eyes and led me to the path of becoming a pretty well-established, well-known divorce attorney in northern New Jersey. I'm a fellow of the International Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, a very preeminent group of lawyers that are experts on international family law. And I opened my law practice immediately after I finished my clerkship. And when I opened my practice, of course, my client base are going to be Muslim and Arab. Of course that when you're going to represent them in family-related matters, Islamic law and Sharia is going to come up. Issues regarding religious rearing is going to come up. foreign documents, translations, foreign judgments. So my practice immediately started to focus to serve the legal and religious needs of the Muslim American community in Northern New Jersey and in New York City. And that's how I built my practice. So I built my practice, and I actually handled the first, I tried a case to conclusion in 2002 regarding the enforcement of a Muslim marriage contract. And the judge agreed with me and enforced the marriage contract, and it was a published Superior Court decision.
Were you representing the wife?
I was representing the wife. And, okay. And in most of my early cases, I tended to represent women. And because of my inclination and being raised by my mom and my dad, I take my entrepreneurship, my aggressive nature, my tough fight posture from my dad. But I take my moral upbringing and my passion for justice and gender from my mom. And so I decided to represent more women. So if a man came in and I saw he was unreasonable, like many men, I mean, people maybe listening to this are not divorce lawyers, but we're used to this. A husband will come in and say, I prefer to pay you rather than pay the bitch. Excuse my French.
Yeah, but so true, yes.
So when somebody tells me that, I'm like, okay, this is an unreasonable human being, and I'm not going to work with him. I'm not going to represent him, because in the end, it's not about me just making money. It's also about representing the interests of the client and doing the right thing. I mean, yes, I'm a fierce litigator, but I'm not an unconscionable or an unethical litigator. So I tended to represent a lot of Muslim women because I knew the culture, I knew the marriage contract, I knew Islamic law, and I became known as the lawyer for Muslim women. So when it's very funny is that a woman would go to the local imam and say, oh, my husband's giving me a hard time, and I want a divorce. Says, listen, this is a case that requires Abed. You should go to him.
Here.
I can't help you.
This is his number.
I can't help you. It's not going to work. So that's how I developed my expertise. And at that time, after I had litigated that case on the Islamic marriage contract, I was aware of Aziz al-Hibri's scholarship on gender and domestic violence and so forth. And again, even in post 9/11, I became very politically active and active in the community. So I was doing a lot of press interviews, TV, lecturing to communities. So I followed this Aziz's work, and I followed KARAMAH. And then I got a call from Aziza and from Aisha Rahman and said, listen, we're very interested in that case that you litigated, and we want you to work with us. So Aziza called me and they said, we want you to be on our board. I believe I was the first male on the board of directors.
What a mutual honor that was.
And from that day, and I'll repeat again, the Muslim community, the leadership in our community is women. Whether you look at KARAMAH, I mean, look at the names, whether it's Aziza, whether it's you, whether it's Linda Sarsour, whether it's Bilo from CARE, whether it's, if you look at who's leading in the Muslim American community, it's Muslim women. And I feel that is a trend that is positive. And it's going to take our community where it has to go and in the right direction. So I joined the board, and I was
God's ears, inshallah.
Yeah, so I was kind of the token guy on the board for a little while.
I beg your pardon.
You started adding more men, I've been on the board ever since. So I've been with KARAMAH more than 15, 16, 17 years, supporting KARAMAH's work and scholarship. And
you do teach in the Law and Leadership program, do you not?
Yes, I do. And usually I teach, I give a course on Islamic family law in American courts, because that's an area of my expertise. I actually published a seminal chapter that surveyed all cases of Islamic law in American courts. And I also was the US editor for Sharia Source, a project at Harvard Law School's Islamic Law Study, focusing on writing and gathering materials about Islamic law in the US. Because believe it or not, Islamic law is very relevant in US litigation. I've testified more than 50 courts around the country. I've provided more than 100 reports on Islamic law or the laws of Muslim majority countries. I have cases in England, in Canada, in Singapore, in states all over the country. So there is a relevance to Sharia. And my approach, which is the KARAMAH approach, is we look at Sharia as a methodology, as an epistemology that produces knowledge. And we use this methodology to produce knowledge that is gender equitable.
Yes, and for sure, we wouldn't be having you on our board. So I'm just very curious for a moment. You will be teaching in the 2020 Law and Leadership Summer Program, our first virtual program. Have you found the move from real life to a virtual course? How have you found that to be? Just speaking this, I'm not sure if you've done any other online teaching. How has that transition been for you?
I mean, I've been doing a lot of lectures online. I prefer live teaching, of course, but the online provides an opportunity for a larger net of people to participate. But that physical human interaction is lacking, you know, and it takes a little bit of time for you to get used to even the camera.
Indeed.
I probably did more than 250 television appearances over my career. And I'll tell you, it took a long time just to get used to the camera. You know, like I would watch myself after I do an interview. I'm like, you're so stiff, you're so not natural. You know, it's not really easy. So doing this lecturing is kind of like your first time in front of a camera on TV. So it takes a little bit of time to get comfortable with it.
Well, it'll be very interesting for KARAMAH also. Doing our first online LLSP will be a bit of a challenge. So as we're winding down, and I know I sort of got you a little bit off course there, I was wondering if you could talk to us for a few minutes about your current project, Sharia Wiz, which I think is going to be very, very useful to the Muslim community. So you have the floor.
Last month, I launched my project that I've been working on for 3 years. It's called ShariaWiz.com. So you can go to ShariaWiz.com. It's an online portal that allows Muslim Americans to prepare a Sharia compliant estate plan, which includes an Islamic will, a healthcare directive, and a general power of attorney. Now, the entire direction or inspiration of Sharia Wiz is looking at Sharia, because actually my marketing group told me not to call it Sharia Wiz. Said, oh, Sharia is very, complicated.
Put a damper on it.
It has so much negativity, and people are going to come after you, and even Muslims are afraid of Sharia. I said exactly the reason why I'm calling it Sharia, because Sharia is our moral legal system, our moral compass. And the Sharia is way more complex and sophisticated than just simply saying it's black letter law or prescriptive in nature. It's a methodology, it's an epistemology that produced knowledge for 1,300 years. So the objective is taking the methodology of Islamic law and allowing people the options, which is the diversity and the richness in the Sharia, to select how to organize their estate plan. So I provided gender equitable Sharia compliant solutions that have been in the tradition for 1,000 years, but people haven't paid attention to it. Like, for example, this is very important. Mahr, which most of us know in the marriage contract, is considered a debt against a husband's estate. Yes. So in the Middle East, if you pass away in Jordan, if you pass away in Egypt or in Palestine or in Pakistan, when you wind down your estate, the mahr, if there's any postponed amount that is outstanding, is going to be paid out of the estate before a spouse receives her 1/8 or 1/4 of the estate. So therefore, you are entitled under Islamic law to increase your mahar, to modify your mahar, if you do it voluntarily, without coercion, without undue influence during the marriage. So a husband is able to say, you know what, you've done so much for me in the past 20 years. We got married, I wasn't really doing well, and our mahar was only, 100 pounds. I'm going to up it to 100,000. I'm going to, you know what, I'm going to up it to be the marital residence, because this is your house. You've been in it and you've been doing it. Now,
not to mention cleaning it for 25 years.
So the marriage, the mahar becomes a debt against the estate. So the wife at the time of husband's death will receive the marital residence plus her 1/8. So we don't have to throw away our Sharia system and go with the secular law to say that the secular law is equitable and the Islamic law is not. Same thing you could do with the marriage contract, which requires that a husband is required to provide food, shelter, and clothing, and somebody to provide the domestic chores around the house, even rearing the children, cleaning, and so forth. Now, that is part of your maintenance. If you did not comply with that obligation, if your wife did all these things and you didn't pay her, you probably have a moral or religious obligation. You should pay her. You should compensate her. In fact, in Iran, there was a cause of action called Ujrat al-Mithil. And Ujrat al-Mithil was to say that even though under Islamic law, there's no post-divorce alimony theory, but there is alimony theory during marriage of maintenance. If you did not comply with your obligations during marriage, you owe her that money.
Exactly.
So we use that as another opportunity for you to use it in the Sharia Wiz format. And finally, that under Islamic law, if a wife contributes or facilitates to the acquisition of the marital estate, she automatically is vested with a legal and equitable claim to the property. Umar ibn al-Khattab, the righteous caliph, who we call Al-Faruq, the just, had a situation where a woman came to him and said to him, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I am so-and-so. I am known as the embroiderer of Medina and Mecca. You know me. You know that I would do all these dresses, work all night, give these dresses to my husband, and he would go to the souk and he would sell them. He passed away. We have no children. The paternal family came along and said that I'm only entitled to a quarter of the estate and that he should receive, the paternal family should get 3/4 of the estate. But that's not fair. He said, you know what? You're absolutely true because you contributed to this. You're going to get half of it because that's yours, and you're going to get your quarter, which is your inheritance. So he flipped the formula. So since the 7th century, we have a wife, a woman, a female can acquire a legal and equitable interest in assets acquired during the marriage, which did not become the law of the land in the United States until the 1960s and 1970s.
Well, let's not forget that under Islam, and that wasn't the case in Europe and the United States, women have always had rights to own their own property. They didn't suddenly become femme couvert just because they were married.
Exactly. The couvert is basically that a woman's identity and personhood merges with that of the husband. He owns it. And that has not been removed until the 20th century, where in Islam, a Muslim woman had independent legal capacity to own, manage, and dispose of property since 7th century. So I utilized these Sharia solutions to provide these options to Muslim Americans preparing their estate plans that will take into account all these items and all these issues. So these are things that the Sharia Wiz project, in its inspiration, is a project about Islam in America. It's a project that is consistent with the purpose of KARAMAH and of us engaging the Muslim American community to look within our tradition. We don't need to look outside our tradition to resolve equitable gender issues, family issues. Our tradition has a lot of solutions. We just need to pay attention and look for them.
That's wonderful. I hope that everybody will, in fact, go to Sharia Wiz, take a look at it. And I hate to say it, but in these days of coronavirus and COVID-19, it is a responsible thing for every Muslim adult to do, to give some thought to their estate plan, because none of us know when or what could be happening. But Let's not dwell on that. Abed, before we close, I wonder if you would share with us some of your very beautiful books and manuscripts. I know that you have been collecting them for quite a while. Tell us a little bit about your collection.
Yes, I've been collecting Islamic manuscripts, handwritten Arabic manuscripts for many, many years. I probably have, I don't know, 400 manuscripts that I've collected, ranging from 500 years old to 150 years old. I'll show you a few. If you look in the background, all of these are handwritten manuscripts. So I can, just take one off the shelf, and I can show the users.
Oh my gosh,
these
look
are
how
handwritten.
beautiful the script is. Yep.
And this is just a reflection that Islam as a civilization, they call it the book civilization.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of beautiful Qur'ans. I have Qur'ans from Africa, which are really one of my prized possessions. So I'll show you. I'm actually been working in my library, and I'll show you just a little bit of a tour so you can see what gorgeous. I have on my chair. These are yes. These are new manuscripts that I bought, that I am going through, trying to identify who the authors are and so forth. I'm going to show you an African Quran, and this is an African Quran.
Oh my!
It is individual pages.
I see. Okay. So they are kept inside of a box, but they're not bound. It's individual pages.
Separate.
Oh my goodness. Mm-hmm.
You can imagine the level of piety, meditation, focus to write the entire Quran on these small pieces of paper and bind them this way. So it starts from Surah Al-Fatiha and it ends within Surah An-Nas. This is probably 200 years old, and most likely from West Africa. And it'll have a leather cover. How they would take it to their mosque or to their school, and keep it at home and study. I have Qur'ans from the Ottoman Empire. I have from North Africa. I'm very interested in Morocco. That's kind of my favorite country, my favorite tradition, and the influences of the Sufi tradition in West Africa. So I have many Qur'ans from there. I have law books. I have Sufi books. I have Hadith Bukhari that is probably 400 years old. That I don't have the entire Sahih Bukhari collection. I have one volume that's about 400 pages.
Yep.
I got so much. It just shows you the wealth and sophistication of our tradition, and it requires us to have respect.
Well, and it's global reach as well.
Global, absolutely. The Islamic civilization was a global civilization. It was not racial. It was not. It was the intercultural fertilization that no other society had. It's kind of like what you see in the United States. Is what makes us great is this diversity in this intercultural fertilization that creates us. That's what the Islamic civilization is. It's black, white, Asian, yellow, green. We all intermarried, had one uniting concept: unity in God, wahdaniyya in Allah. And that propelled a civilization to greatness.
That's wonderful. Well, Abed, thank you so much for letting me interview you today. I think it would be more than fair to say that you've lived a life of integrity, balancing scholarship with service. It's really been a pleasure.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Sarah, for all your work and for inviting me.
We must come on again and maybe talk about how you go about your book collecting. But for today, I think we should let you go. But before we do, just a quick closing plug. Our next Lunch and Learn program is scheduled for Thursday, the 25th of June at noon. Our speaker will be KARAMAH board member and co-secretary for 2020, Ms. Noha Mustafa, inshallah. Ms. Mustafa is an LLSP alumna, class of 2011, and she's co-chair of the Alumna Committee. Thank you all so very much for attending our Lunch and Learn series today.